Shake, shake, my comrade. Shake that invention of the working class. Shake that unifying medicine before it's too late. Shake before the time come to pass. Shake that guava juice. And throw Kabane, throw that liquid of capitalist invention, throw the blood of Nzikane, throw before they see your intention, just throw that guava juice. And dance, dance, my hero, dance around the fire of resistance, dance at the success of your dance because the dogs are still at a distance. Shake, shake, dance, my comrade. Shake that invention of the working. Make my young lion. Shake that unifying juice. Make another one as strong as iron. Make beg for a truce. Make those guava juices. And beg, you bastard. Beg that your filthy skin be spared. Beg that your blood does not flood. Beg because you've many guava juices stored. Beg those little dangerous guava juices.
It said no more Xhosa, Sotho, no more Zulu. Refusing to comply, they sent an answer. That's when the policeman came to the rescue. When the children were flying, bullets dying, all the mothers screaming and crying. Just a little atrocity deep in the city. Beni kupina matoda, babe tubula abantwana. Beni kupina abantwana, babe jigijela ezizimbokodo. Beni kupina. Knocking at the door was the man without pity, accusing everyone of conspiracy, tightening the curfew, charging people with walking. The border is where he was waiting for the children, frightened and running. Away, but all the others are in the jail without any publicity, just a little atrocity deep in the city. Beni kupina matoda, babe tubula abantwana. Beni kupina abantwana, babe jigijela ezizimbokodo. Beni kupina. Soweto blues, Soweto blues, Soweto blues. Soweto blue, without any publicity. Soweto blue, they are finishing our nation. Soweto blue, and calling it black on Soweto blue, but everybody knows they're behind. Soweto blue, without any publicity. Soweto blue. Soweto
Good evening, everybody. We welcome all who have joined this very important conversation. Today, in 1976, over 600 Black children were murdered by the apartheid regime. We're going to have a conversation with two panelists. I am in many ways really honored and a little bit overwhelmed by the quality of the panelists that have agreed to discuss on this platform this 1976 event. We will ask the question, what is the place of 1976 Soweto Uprising, the uprising, in the history of our liberation? And then we will probably have to ask the question, what are the lessons? We have invited three panelists. Really, I mean, you have seen the responses when people saw that we're going to talk to Comrade Laibon Mabasa, Dr. Mokoape, Professor Mosala. There was huge appetite to participate and to listen to their views because they do represent the best we have in the Black consciousness movement. I just want to start off by saying, unfortunately, Comrade Laibon is unable to participate in this conversation. He is not well, Comrade Laibon Mabasa. But we do have Ndate Mokoape. We also do have Professor Mosala. And I think at this point, before I even go further, it will be good for both Ndate Mokoape and Professor Mosala just to greet our audience. And I'll start with Ndate Mosala. Ndate Mosala, and will come through. Ndate Mokoape, let's see if you, oh, I see Ndate Mosala is able to come through. Ndate Mosala, do you Chaba? Sahau.
Good evening, on this very important day.
May I interrupt you, Professor Mosala? It is possible that your mic is not, is either away, you are very faint, we can't hear you.
Okay. You want, I can take it out. I can. Ah.
Yeah, that's good. The voice is good.
Okay, the voice is better than the thing on the ear.
Yeah, now you're perfect. We can hear you well.
Oh, thank you. No, I just wanted to say good evening to the Azanian people, to our nation, our people, our brothers and sisters. It's actually a great privilege to be part of this discussion tonight.
Thank you. Professor Mosala is the president of the Black Consciousness Movement United. We'll talk probably, when you come in, Dr. Mosala, you'll tell us a little bit about that initiative so that we all are more or less on the same page.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Mokoape, Tower of Towers. Bingelela abantu wakho.
Molweni, Comrade Andile, Notatu Msala, molweni, ndiyanibulisa nabo bonke abantu bakowethu abantu basazini, our audience tonight. Thank you very much for the privilege of being able to be on this panel and speak to our people tonight about this very important matter of June 16 and our revolution in general. Gabon.
Sabule. Now, Dr. Mokoape, if you look at this revolutionary biography, he was one of the youngest political prisoners. He was arrested when he was 15, as we understand it, with that first move with Sobukwe on the protests and defiance of the apartheid regime. So they gave you 3 years then. And then you did not give up. Ndate Mokoape, we see him again with the Sasso trial. Now they give him 6 years back in by the regime. That kind of determination is really inspirational. I don't think many people would have gone back after they had done their first stint with the apartheid regime. So that's what part of his biography is. That Mosala, president of ZAPO, led one of the Black consciousness movement that takes over after the apartheid regime had banned all the organizations of Steve Biko. Now, we are commemorating June 16 in a situation where the world is going through a crisis. There's the pandemic, there's the crisis of ideological clarity, and there's our people generally in danger. I hope through this conversation we can begin to also provide some kind of direction to our people. But there's contestation. I just want to put it out there. One of the biggest motivation for this conversation is a contestation about who should be credited with June 16. Now, maybe for younger people, this is an urgent question. But maybe for older, seasoned revolutionaries, it might look appropriative, not necessary, divisive. However, there is a need, we believe, to put the historical record straight. So we will have to deal with that question. Which of the liberation movements was instrumental in basically bringing June 16 into fruition to happen? And then the big question is, what is the place of June 16 in the history of resistance in this country? We make claims, some of us, that without June 16, the liberation movement, such as the PAC and the ANC in exile, would not have been re-energized to pursue the struggle further. But we'd like to hear more from our panelists. Then there's a question which is bothering a lot of young people. What happened to TAT Mashini? Dada Mosala, I know you are very close to that process. We will have to come to that issue because again, there's distortions, there is misrepresentations, and in some ways also there's erasure of TAT's contribution to what happened to him. So those are some of the questions that I hope we'll go through, and then we must talk about Black consciousness, its relevance, and why is it that Black consciousness as an organized force is not playing the role that it should be playing in society. It should be playing in the politics of this country. I don't think there is anyone who would dispute the fact that Black consciousness has become a minor player in the formal political space. Formal political space. I'm not talking about the young people claiming Bigo, going back to Black consciousness, attempting to understand the world. But the movement itself, as an organized force, I don't think there's an argument about where it is. And the question is, why is that the case? And what can be done to turn the situation around? So I am just absolutely delighted to have you on tonight to help us through this conversation. Let me just make my one little submission, final submission. The June 16 event, it seems to me, cannot be understood outside of the Abraham Tiro, Steve Biko dynamic. And in this way that Abraham Tiro, after he was expelled, he came to Soweto, he does organizational work. Now, Steve Biko, and this is, I think, the general missing part of the analysis of understanding the 76 uprising, is the Saswa trial. That Mokoape was one of the accused there. In fact, I was reading that Mokoape, the testimony. There's a book, all book out on the testimony. Please pass me the book. On the testimony on Bigo, the testimony of Steve Biko. I think this book came out quite earlier, but they reissued it. I mean, it is the biggest, And in it, there, I see Steve Biko right at the beginning of the trial. They asked, how did it start? And Biko says, we had to contest this idea of non-racialism with some people. And then counsel says, who are these people? And he says, my friend, such as Mokoape. And then they say, oh, so that is accused number 4. He says, I don't know what number of the accused are, but yes, that is the man. So in a sense, this trial, I want to argue that with the work of Tiro, the SASO trial is what gives trigger to the work that Tiro had done before, organizing these young people, teaching them Black consciousness, and bringing them to SASO. Without the SASO trial and Biko's brilliant, if you like, testimony that electrified the whole Transvaal, as we understand at the time, the media, the radio, these articulate young men speaking and actually beating the system in its own game had given a huge impetus to what then happened on June 16. So I am saying, it seems to me that we need to bring Tiro and Biko together to understand what makes this June 16 rupture possible. That is a submission that I make. And I've seen that some of the June 16 leaders are referring to that particular trial. Now, in conclusion, just on this part, because that relates to which liberation movement must be credited with Black consciousness, with a 76 uprising. The response of the regime is to arrest everyone who seemed to have been a leader. Zephania Mutupeng ended up with a 15 years in jail, and we know that he's a leader of the PAC. Winnie Mandela they take her in for 4 months first, and then they banish her to Brantford, again saying that she's the one responsible or the mastermind behind this June 16 uprising. This, in my view, this response of the regime has added to the confusion about actually which of the liberation movement is instrumental in organizing resistance, which of course end up with the 1976 uprising. But I will stop there because the next point will be on deity, and I think we can do that when we do the next round. But those are my initial submissions, and maybe we'll start with Ntate Mosala, and then we'll give Ntate Mokoape. The place of Black consciousness and these attendant questions.
Yes, you have said a lot, Comrade Andile. The key issue really is to admit, anybody with brains should admit that the students of 1976 didn't just wake up and started going wild. That in their heads, in their hearts, there was a consciousness that was burning them from inside. And that consciousness, unlike some of the things that I delve in my other life and profession, doesn't fall from the sky. You have already indicated that Tiro had been hard at work. Remember that the strike at Tefluop in the early 70s, I think it was 71 or 72, that Mokoape, you can help me get the specific facts correct on that. I think it was a 72 or 71 strike at Tefluop had led to students being expelled, at least from Tefluop, but because the white regime was very clear that that blacks as a whole are a problem, and they were very clear about that. They didn't stop with the Tefluop students. There was trouble at Ngoya, there was trouble at Bush in the Western Cape, there was trouble everywhere where Black institutions were, there was trouble. And so there was a whole cohort of Black students, radical students, who left campuses and came back into the Black community. Notable amongst them, of course, was Tiro, because he went into a teaching profession, he organized other teachers, he influenced students, he educated them, or as we put it, he conscientized them. There was a very specific BC political methodological approach called conscientization. Everyone who left the campus those years left having been conscientized and with a mission to go and conscientize. So the students of June 16 were not conscientized. And there was only one organization that was conscientizing people. We had heard, those of us who were too young had heard about the ANC and how it used to operate when it was in the country, the PAC, how it was started and how it operated when it was inside the country. But we truly and factually had never encountered any form of conscientization from those organizations, neither before they left nor while they were gone. And remember, they were gone for quite a while. From 1960 to 1976 was many years, and no conscientization happened here. And there is an ideological reason for that, and it has to do with a radical difference between Black consciousness as a political philosophy and all other things that people espouse. I don't know what to truly call them, and I don't want to be rude. Black consciousness was grounded on a determination to be fearless. We rose up because it was quite clear that our people had been cowed down by the forces of the system. Our people had been intimidated in all kinds of things. And unless a political philosophy started dealing with that existential problem of Black people as a result of the banishing of organizations and the imprisonment of organizations and the general treatment of Black people by white people, unless it started with conscientization, it couldn't instill the most needed a weapon in the hands of Black people. And that was fearlessness, courage, and anger. And we had to be angry, and we decided to be angry, and we were taught to be angry. We were in fact taught to be able to die if necessary. Of course, our mission was to kill the system, to kill the elements of the system. But it was important not to be afraid of the system's own intent to kill us. So on the ground, I can tell you that the movement had been spreading through the churches, through the universities, through the colleges, through the nursing institutions. The movement was everywhere. I was recruited into the Black consciousness movement at a conference in Umtata in 1972. I had been contacted by Ben Kwapa much earlier, and I had been reading stuff and debating with people about stuff. But in actual recruitment into the organization, I met Steve and Rapeip. Lengwekulu. Stephen Lengwekulu attended a conference that I was attending also in Ngambedlana in Umtata in 1972. And they didn't waste time. They never wasted time. The Mokoapes, the Bigos, the Nchaupe, they were in a mission to conscientize. It is strange that anybody thinks that they would not have wanted to conscientize in the schools. The truth is they did, and the uprising, the explosion of Soweto and Guguletu and all of the other townships in 1976 was a very direct political product of that conscientization problem, but also the conscientization problem had instilled the will to die for freedom. Let me leave it there for now. So the Black consciousness movement is well, you can never say that there were no other variables. You can't. In life, you can't say you can't say they didn't have parents, for example, who were ANC, who were talking to them about politics. You can't say they didn't have parents in the PAC or any other organization, the Indian Congress of South Africa, whatever. You can't say that there hadn't been other variables. If you're talking about an impact variable, the outcome of which was Soweto, the Soweto Uprising, or the June 16th Uprising, you're talking about the Black Consciousness Movement.
Thank you, Professor Mosala. Ntate Mokoape.
I don't think, is there anything else to say after Mosala has given that exposition? No, absolutely correct, Dr. Mosala, but I don't like this question about who was responsible for the advancement of any chapter of our revolution. I really think it's a nonsensical and contentious question. We don't own this revolution. This revolution belongs to our people. We're merely agents of a revolution at any particular time who are called upon by the revolutionary cause to be active at that time. But maybe let's help, and very quickly, because this would be too long, to put the matter in historical perspective. When Steve found me at medical school, I think it was 1967 or so, I preceded him to medical school. And as you mentioned in your introduction, I had my initial training in the Pan-Africanist Congress and been a member of it. And in 1960, I participated in what you know as the Soweto Uprising at the age of 16. And I was arrested then and sentenced to 3 years, hard labor, which I served in several prisons here in the country, including number 4, the Fort, Pretoria Central, Witbank, Sasolburg, Stoffberg, and so on. Upon release, I was the youngest prisoner, yes, you're right. I was the youngest prisoner at that time in the whole of South Africa at 16, the very youngest political prisoner at that time. On my release, after trying a stint in exile in Lesotho, and after a while getting expelled from Lesotho back to South Africa, actually deported back to South Africa, I went to do some labor work. I worked for OK Bazaars in Johannesburg. And when there was the major roundup of PAC activists, the Poko activists, of which I was one at that time when I was in Johannesburg, I luckily escaped arrest. Luckily, I escaped arrest. And thereafter, at the urging of my father and my uncle, Dr. Motlana, they took me by the scruff of the neck and put me in medical school. That's how I ended up in medical school. So you can see that by the time I came to medical school, I'd already cut my teeth in politics. I'd served my time in prison. I'd been with Sobukwe. I actually had spent more than 3 years with Sobukwe, slept in the same cell with him and so on. So I was quite steeped in politics. When I got to medical school, this was just after the organizations had been banned. And there were 2 organizations which belonged to the ANC and PAC student organizations at that time, ASA, African Students Association, ASUSA, African Students Union of South Africa, affiliated with the ANC and PAC respectively. And there was a sprinkling of unity movement people also at medical school. But all of those organizations had been flattened by the response of the regime in the post-Sharpeville period. It's so vicious, that period of real suppression, jackboot suppression. That's the period that sent the PAC and ANC into underground and overseas into exile, and a lot of them into prison. So there was basically no political activity. at the time that I got to medical school. Then there was the other variable then. The only organization that existed on campus was the National Union of South African Students, which was a liberal organization which had both black and white members on several institutions, particularly the English institutions, Wits, Rose, UCT, and so on. And at our university, the students were affiliated to NUSAS. But my understanding of politics at that time made me unable to cast my lot with NUSAS. I saw it as a multiracial organization with no particular impact that it could make on society, and they were busy with petitions and those kind of things. When Steve arrived, he threw his lot with NUSAS. And for some reason, Steve and I drew close to each other, and we argued about exactly where South African students should be. And we had I think almost 2-year continuous argument between Steve and I, between multiracialism and the need, which I was saying, for Black people to form their own organizations and to challenge the system, precisely because they were the oppressed, they were the exploited, they knew the pinch, they knew the pain of oppression. And that my argument at that time was that the white students, yes, they might be intellectually wanting to affiliate or associate with the struggle, but their objective conditions are such that they don't know the actual pain. They live in a different world. They have a different experience. And when we leave college, when we qualify, we're going back to the townships and the villages. They're going to the suburbs. They're going to join their father's companies and so on. So my argument was, if we want to progress our freedom, we need to form a. And after about 2 years, Steve and I agreed that indeed this was the case. But I didn't, although I argued with him, but his actual conversion came out of his own experiences when he realized that the NUSAS environment in which he was actually a hostile environment. And when he came back from that conference where he was really chastened by the fact that the white students identified with the system, he came back and him and I began to see eye to eye. And that is the genesis of SASO and the Black Consciousness Movement. We didn't have an ideology at that time. We didn't have a clear idea as to where we're going, but we knew that the responsibility for the struggle rests on our shoulders. I won't talk much about that. Let's go fast forward. The first steps we took when we created the South African Students Organization, and you'll be amused at this. We called ourselves non-whites. In our first constitution, we actually say, we the non-white students of South Africa, having realized that the burden of the struggle lies with us, hereby resolves as non-whites that we want to form our own organization. It was only after, with the passage of time, because Black consciousness did not come to us in one fell swoop. It was a perpetual argument, the discovery, self-discovery. It was after a time that we realized we cannot call ourselves non-whites. We cannot be the negatives of white people. We are Black and we named ourselves Black. We deliberately named ourselves Black. And we also deliberately, and this is a coming into consciousness, because the beauty about consciousness, it is something that comes into you. The journey of consciousness is a continuous journey. We came into that consciousness that we are not only talking here about Africans, we are not only talking here about the colored people who are also Africans. We are not only talking about the Indian people as separate people, we're actually talking about all the marginalized people of this country, the indigenous people, the Khoi and the San. We're talking about the slaves who were brought here from West Africa, from the East Indies. We're talking about the children of the indigenous, the oppressors. We're talking about the Indians who were brought here as quasi semi-slaves. All the people who are suffering under the jackboot of racism, white racism. And we are together. We are together, and as a unit, we need to come together. Black solidarity and fight the system. That is the context, the early context of this movement. Now, those seeds which were planted at that time also told us, we also came into the realization that we are students, and that as students alone, we do not have the capacity to be at the front of a national revolution. Nor do we have the capacity to carry the revolution. We need to get out of the campuses. We made a conscious decision, very important. We made a conscious decision, it was not accidental, to go out of the campuses and spread the message of Black consciousness. We made a conscious decision to go and form other organizations. And that brings us to the question of 1976. 1976 is the logical manifestation of the work that was done, logical consequence of the work that was done from 1968 onwards. It was a deliberate effort to form organizations. I personally went out to help form a South African students movement for TAT's group. Drake Coker, who was one of us, formed the Black Allied Workers Union. We formed the Black Theology chapter at a theological seminary, largely run by Stanley Ndwasa, one of our comrades. So we spread ourselves everywhere, but it was deliberate. It's important to understand that it was deliberate, that we form all these organizations. And as we're forming these organizations, we're spreading the word as Mosala elaborated. And that effort was supplemented and aided by the actions of the regime themselves. When they expelled Tiro, and all of us in the universities decided to go on strike and boycotted our universities, we went back to our villages and to our townships, and we spread the message and explained to our parents why we had got out of the universities and what was happening to us in the universities and how it was connected to their lived experiences where they were at their workplaces, in the townships, why it was that they were poor, why it was that they were carrying passes, and all of that. So we connected the dots between the struggles of the students and the struggles of our people deliberately. And this is what I've been trying to say to our young people in the Fees Must Fall movement, Roads Must Fall, that you see, unless they go out and come to us as their parents, to the communities, and connect the dots between their struggles and our struggles. Unless they do that, their struggle will be isolated. Because what is happening, what has been happening through the media and so on, they've been demonized. And we as parents, most parents will say, these children, they are burning libraries. These children are boycotting classes. These people, these children are wasting our monies. We are paying so much money for them to go to school, and they don't want to go to school. They're boycotting classes because we do not comprehend each other's struggles. So it is important for young people, and maybe we'll talk about that later, that they must learn to connect their struggles with the struggles of the community. Let me stop there for now.
Thanks, Dr. Mokoape. You know, I don't know, you have seen the 1972 interview with Gil Gahat that is done by Steve. And
Yes.
there he claims that, I mean, it's interesting to listen to you about the black question, you know, the African question in particular, because he says he persuaded you persuaded him on the liberal question, on the white liberals. But he says he persuaded you on the Indian question. And I mean, it will be interesting to hear another time the texture of that debate between you and Steve.
It was a 2-year debate, as I tell you, from 1967 to 1979. We argued every night. It's legendary. Everybody who was at university with us knows the argument that Steve and I had. But it was an intellectual discovery and rediscovery and picking each other's brains, and it was wonderful. And perhaps let me not claim everything. There were other comrades amongst us whom I remember very fondly, like Dr. Giz Abram, who's just passed away 2 years back, Chapman Palweni, Vuyelwa Mashalaba, one of the most powerful ladies that we had. She was one of the earlier people who were there. But the principal antagonists were myself and Steve. Yes, he didn't quite persuade me on the Indian question. Well, he did it in the yes and no. As you know, in the PAC, the attitude was that the Indians are made up of what we could call two classes: the merchant class and the coolies. And when I'm not using coolies in the sense that it's used in Durban, I mean the working class, the ones who who are living in the townships and so on. And the attitude in the PAC was that the Indians must not allow themselves to be led by the merchant class. But that was a lengthy argument. But we ultimately convinced each other about the path which was taken by Black consciousness.
Thank you, Dr. Mokoape.
Yes.
Yes, and then just to come back to Professor Mosala. Professor Mosala, you know that I want to pick on two points that you raised and then Dr. Mokoape raised in terms of just the character of the student, and it's a lesson for us. I mean, you make this point about how in 72, and it is also confirmed by Dr. Mokoape, students actually leave university in protest. Now, that is a huge sacrifice that we wouldn't do today, where in solidarity with one of us would sacrifice our own studies to pursue the agenda of solidarity. That's the one element. But the second is the fact that students deliberately, programmatically actually engage society, larger society. Instead of decolonizing the university, it was decolonizing society. I think these are the 2 points that perhaps you can come back to. But I must say that please do comment on the place of 1976 in the broad liberation movement in terms of its contribution. But also, can we talk a little bit about Tsietsi? I mean, I know I'm putting a lot of questions to you, but it will be nice to just hear how you reflect on those.
Yes, maybe I should start with Tsietsi. I didn't know Tsietsi personally at the beginning because I was located at the time closer to June 76. I was located in the Eastern Cape and in Pietermaritzburg. I was moving between those 2 places. In fact, on the day that the day after June 16 broke out, Steve Munchani and I, based in Pietermaritzburg, part of the SASO of the University of Durban, of Natal at the time. I think a comrade called G, Dr. Mg, later became Dr. Mg, was the last president of SASO at that particular time. We were sent into Soweto from Pietermaritzburg. And so we heard about Tsietsi at the time. I hadn't known him personally. I came to connect with Tsietsi many years later outside the country, but that's another story. It will answer your earlier question about what happened to Tsietsi, and we can talk about that then, because I then had this, shall I call it, the historical fortune of being at his funeral, of actually fetching his body from the airport when it landed after Zappo had arranged to bring the body back from West Africa. But let's leave that for when we talk about what happened to Tsietsi. But on the broader issue of the place of June 16 in the history of the struggle for liberation in our country, there is absolutely no doubt that that was the highest stage of the revolution, so to speak. The revolution reached its peak. And I like Mokoape's approach to it, that we're talking about the whole revolution. We're not talking about parties. We're talking about the revolution of our people. That encompasses all of the forms of resistance that our people have embarked upon from time immemorial, so to speak. But there is absolutely no doubt it shocked everybody. It shocked our parents about, we knew these kids, who knew that these kids didn't fear white people, who knew that these kids are angry, who knew that these kids have determined to look death in the face. But we didn't think it will be to this extent and in this form. But that was also true of the national liberation movements in exile and in prison as well. They also were shocked by the form, the timing, the characteristics and properties of this particular form, and I don't want to say version, form of the struggle. It was the highest stage of the national revolution to liberate our country and people. And we have to talk at some stage, I hope, about what then went wrong later with that revolution. Where is that revolution? Because that revolution would have placed us very differently now in Azania. That revolution would have placed the relationships between whites and blacks differently from the way they are placed at the moment. It would have placed the classes of our society, the social classes and economic classes, much more differently had that revolution had something happened to it. And we need to talk about it. I just have the pleasure and privilege of having been, again, the president of AZAPO, Dr. Mokoape as the deputy president, at a time when we were being asked by the whole world, not just people in South Africa, by the whole world, to betray that revolution. We were asked in 1994, well, 1990 to 1994, that entire period was a period of struggle to betray or not to betray. But the place of June 76 is that highest form. After that, there was really no turning back, at least as far as we were concerned. After that, we were entering, if I can use the language of my other profession, the promise.
No, the Prof is right. 1976 was actually, as I said earlier, it was a logical consequence of the development of the Black consciousness movement. 1976 was going to occur. The way we had spread our message throughout our communities, it was going to occur. If it was not going to occur at schools as it did, it was going to occur in the universities. there existed a revolutionary situation. The country was pregnant.
It was also going to occur in the churches. Remember,
it was going to
by
occur
by that time, we had dethroned the white god.
The white god was gone.
He was no longer a white god.
Yes.
I don't know.
Jesus Christ was gone.
I don't know who fetched him back.
So, Mngxitama, I frame it this way. I say 1976 was the tipping point in the Azanian revolution, and that from 1976 onwards, until the system buckled, the regime buckled in 1994. And unfortunately, when the regime buckled in 1994, instead of taking victory, we got afraid to be victorious. We got afraid to be victorious. But from 1976 onwards, there was unleashed in this country a people's war, a proper people's war. From 1976 June, if you will remember, throughout to about 1977 June until the death of September, there wasn't a day in this country when this country, some parts of this country were not on fire. And from 1977 to the formation of AZAPU, the same, right up to 1994, it was a 20-year uninterrupted people's war, which unfortunately didn't end up too well. There are two things that outraged me about 1976. First of all, it is the ANC's attempt to diminish its significance by creating out of it a youth day. 1976 June was not a youth day, nor was it a student's day. It was a national insurrection. This country has never experienced an insurrection before then and after then of the magnitude of that day, where everybody, student, worker, academic, everybody was involved in that struggle. The academics, we had the Black Academic Staff Association, we had the Mwasa, Black journalists, led by, my comrade, Bokwe Mafuna, one of the bravest guys I know, who resigned from the staff of the Rand Daily Mail at Sasso Congress because his editor wanted to write that it was a non-white Congress, and he insisted that it was a Black Congress, and he resigned there and then. But there was no turning back. So if I were a historian and I were to write on our struggle, I would say the last war against the apartheid regime started in 1968 and continued without let until 1994. It was a 25-year war, led by the Black Consciousness movement, led by the Black Consciousness philosophy. And integral to that philosophy is what Mosala talks about, lack of fear. Steve writes a very brilliant article on fear, I'm sure you've read it. And he says, fear is what governs both the oppressor and the oppressed. The oppressed because they fear the oppressor. And Black consciousness destroyed fear. It was militant, it was urgent. It was clear in its objective, the total overthrow of the system. If you look at our literature, most of our literature, you find the word that appears most is not even apartheid. It is the system, the total overthrow of the system in all its manifestations: capitalism, racism, gender, discrimination, the system, the military complex, all in all its its components. We knew that you could not overthrow racism without overthrowing capitalism, because they occupy both sides of the same coin. racism and capitalism are inextricably intertwined. For those of you who read history, capitalism proper arose in the mercantile period, what's called the mercantile period, the voyages of discovery. But side by side with the voyages of discovery, there arose racism, white colonial racism was a part and parcel of the establishment of capitalism. Some historians even think capitalism would never have prospered in the manner that it did without white racism. You will remember, the priest will remember for us, Baba Mfundisi, that it was Pope, I think Pope Nicholas V, who issued the papal bull authorizing King Alfonso of Portugal to send his armies to the so-called New World to enslave the barbarians, the Africans, to enslave them and rape them, the papal bull. So it had the authority of the church, the merchant, and the military all went together for the suppression of black people. So the whole system of capitalism, not only in South Africa, but throughout the world, lives side by side with racism.
Yeah, simply cannot survive without racism.
It cannot survive without racism.
It's an ideological necessity for capitalism.
Yes, absolutely.
So basically, if we were just to come in there, it looks like Black consciousness at this moment has become hegemonic, in the sense that when you talk of the academics, you find Black people are organized. You go to students, they are organized. Workers are organized. Now, I mean, the church is organized, and Dade Mosala and Mokoape speak about the Black God who had expelled the other God. But now, I mean, as we hear, somebody want to fetch this expelled God back into the affairs of Black people. Now, that kind of discourse today comes across as disturbing, because it's almost like we had forgotten the work that the different fronts of the Black consciousness movement had achieved. So I think that is one of the important observations that I will take away from this conversation. And we've even spoken about the artists, I mean, the art world, the cultural world. Oh, that was another front as well. So there's a totality of engagement. And perhaps that is the biggest contribution from Black consciousness to our, struggle. This is the big lesson. If we're going to make progress, there must be totality of engagement.
We used to say it's a total struggle for total liberation against total oppression, because oppression is not segmented. I hear people today talk about political oppression, political freedom, and economic freedom, and I don't know which other freedom and which other freedom. Freedom, as with oppression, is a totality. You cannot be politically free and economically not free. It is an impossibility. It cannot occur, because to exercise political will, you need to have economic ability. Absolutely. How do you cast a vote when you can't read? How do you cast a vote for a party when you can't read? You know, some of these ballot papers, they put animals there because our mothers and relatives can't read. They put an elephant for some party, they put a lion for some other party, and so. And depending whether you fear lions or you fear elephants, you might vote for the wrong party. How do you cast a vote when you can't read? How do you analyze the news on the television when you have no education? So the whole thing is a sham. And unless we can upend the entire system, and it is, and you see what happened in 1994, we were intimidated, particularly the ANC, intimidated into thinking that if you want to take everything, the country will collapse. The country will collapse, the economy will collapse. That's what the white liberals intimidated the ANC with. You will inherit nothing, because there will be nothing for you to inherit. Why are we afraid to start afresh? The revolution is not about paper in the cracks. We can't talk revolution.
Mokoape, before we miss that point, an important point was that one of the key successes of Black consciousness was the displacement of liberalism, of white liberalism, both ideologically and physically from the struggle. They make a return around 1994. And when they get back, they reinstate exactly the things that we had overthrown. Those things were the precursors, you couldn't be free unless you had cleaned up the system, the liberation movement of those things. So the issue of the role of the liberals in where we are now, what we do now, how we do it, who of ourselves we choose to lead us, it is a very important one. That really is the role of Black consciousness. And maybe we didn't do a good job in making sure that that understanding continues and pervades later generations of Black consciousness people. I say generations not in years terms. Some generations are locational, depends where they were.
Before we come to the, thanks for that. But before we come to the next segment, I do want us to come back to the Black consciousness. Those questions we had raised earlier. The existing organized form of Black consciousness movement today is not where it's supposed to be. What accounts for this? And what needs to be done to bring Black consciousness as an organized form to where it's supposed to be in society? But before we respond to that, I want us to just check this clip that Brother Mpo is going to share with us, just bring us back to some of the events as they unfold around the 1976 June Uprising. I hope Mpo is ready with the clip that we wish to share.
People passed, people ran away, and this kid innocently raised his fist in a black power sign and said power to this passing Hippo. The Hippo stopped there on the spot and they opened fire on this 8-year kid. When I went to the mortuary on the weekend, I saw this kid at the mortuary. She was riddled with bullets beyond recognition. The black student in South Africa is being fed the type of education that will domesticate him to become a better tool for the white man when he joins the working community. School libraries, school books, they've got nothing to do with civics or anything that is affiliated in any manner to politics. What happens is we are fed a lot of fiction stories. I could quote so many authors in fictitious writers that you would be surprised where I get them. Even our libraries are ill-equipped. You don't get much works on, say, democracy, communism, fascism, capitalism, and all that. We only know these things as concepts and something not within our world.
It's more than likely, Tsietsi, that you're being described up and down the country at the moment as a communist.
There is no truth in that as far as I'm concerned. It is just that in South Africa, if you're not doing what the government expects you to do, then you are a communist, of course.
As we interviewed Tsietsi Mashinini, the news came in of how successful the students' plan had been.
It makes me very happy, very happy.
What is it actually achieving now?
The idea is we blacks in South Africa do not have arms, and the only thing we can hit at the system with is just to cripple the economy of the country and make our faint cries reach the ears of the authorities. Because apparently if we demonstrate, they just shoot at us. And if they don't shoot, they detain a whole lot of students. Now we are trying to be as peaceful as possible. Detain the parents at home, and the parents are with us and they're prepared to stay at home as long as the students want them to stay at home. Now, with this, we believe the authorities will feel the pinch, and some way or the other, they'll have to succumb to our demands.
That was Tsietsi Mashinini. Tsietsi Mashinini, the, if you like, product of the work, the revolutionary work education of Abraham Tiro in Soweto. That is the leader of the 1976 uprising, and he is now in exile, reflecting back home with that massive successfully strike, which was called by a second in command, Khoto Siahlulo. Now, he's been asked about that. And again, I think it confirms the conversation we've had thus far, that there was totality of engagement. The students understood the importance of the worker in the struggle for liberation. I mean, that was Tsetsi Mashinini. Now, I just want to, because we have the last about 25 minutes left. And in that 25 minutes, can we just deal with these questions which have been thrown? The state of Black consciousness organization today, and what must be done? Why is it that we are not where we're supposed to be? Is it just external forces? Is it just what the ANC has done to us? Is what imperialism has done to us? Or there are internal weaknesses that we should have been better prepared for and we have not looked at? And how do we correct this? Maybe we start with Ntate Mosala.
Yes, sir. I think, let me say, I hope that Dr. Mokoape will agree with me on this, that the success that we achieved in the early days of the movement, all the way up to 76, lulled us into complacency about where the levels of revolutionary consciousness were inside the movement. I don't think I'm putting it right. I'm trying to talk about how uneven political consciousness actually was. But because we were running a movement of towers, we never ever thought it was possible for someone to be in this movement, to hang around with towers, to work with towers, to learn from towers, and to represent a lower level of political development intellectually in terms of consciousness. That unevenness brings us into the 80s, and specifically into the 90s, into the early 90s. When I was at UCT in that entire decade of the 80s into mid-1994, sharpness, there was still a radical urge. There was still, the anger was still.
Prof, isn't this the problem, Prof? That some people are saying precisely the movement became too intellectual. So the movement stopped being a revolutionary movement with a professional revolutionary class.
It's not the intellectualness of it that was the problem. It's the levels of lack of intellectualism. That was actually a problem. Not because we were intellectual. Because you see, the intellectual character of the Black consciousness movement takes you straight back into community, what Dr. Mokoape was talking about. You couldn't spend your time on campus. You couldn't spend your time in the church. You couldn't spend all your time in all of these places. You were needed somewhere else. Your streets were all over the place. Precisely, and it's not so much the intellectual thing, it's just political development. I think the word intellectual doesn't capture what I'm talking about. So let me tell you what happens. When we hit 1994, 93, 94, we began to discover the level of unevenness ideologically. That's really what I'm talking about, ideological development. And that doesn't necessarily equate to intellectual development. There are many intellectuals, good intellectuals, so to speak, or highly developed intellectual who are ideological fools. Okay, so we enter a point where we have to push the struggle harder and further. We have no time but time for war. And then we discover that not all soldiers are ready for war. Okay, and we begin to speak in tongues. I think Mokoape is much more experienced to find the conceptual frameworks to give that flesh.
Yeah, yes, as Tate Mokoape takes from that point, I do, if the exposition that, well, the problem was under intellectual underdevelopment.
Ideological
underdevelopment. Ideological development, underdevelopment, rather. And yeah, there were tactical mistakes linked to this ideological unevenness. And they must be accounted for. The position that Azapo takes with vis-a-vis, for instance, the elections of 1994, it could not have been tactically correct. And I want to argue that it is part of perhaps this ideological unevenness that you're speaking about, because clearly you can't stay away from an election, which for the majority of the people represents a moment away from, with all your criticism that you are making. So you can have another bite at that, but I want to argue that was a tactical mistake which Azapo paid for dearly and never recovered for. But let's hear Ndate Mokoape.
I disagree, but I can come back later. The question is, was Azapo...
No. We should
the same thing as the black consciousness that it had come out of.
We should cover that point. We'll cover that point at length. But let me just remind you guys that precisely because the Black Consciousness Movement was functioning in this highly hostile terrain, we succeeded to a very large extent to progress the revolution in this very hostile terrain. But the regime was not asleep. The regime was at work, and the imperialist forces. The number of our people who were arrested and the turnover in leadership, and this goes maybe to Mosala's point about ideological development. We had a lot of ideological training, leadership training, but at every turn, the regime was removing our leaders, so that we had a very high turnover of leadership. The effect of this was that some of the leaders who came to the fore had not necessarily gone through the mill of proper training, ideological training, and leadership training. From about 1973, I think about 8 layers of our leadership got arrested, detained, banned, and so forth. By 1974, when we were arrested, we left almost a vacuum. That is us who were in the Sasu BPC trial. I think the regime arrested more than 100 people. But luckily, we still had some people outside who could go on with the movement. But this constant removal of leadership definitely had an effect. That's the one point. The second point, which might be controversial, and I'll hear about this from my other comrades when they attacked me, maybe, is that maybe we were a victim of our own success in a certain sense. That our message of revolution went out so fast and so wide, and it was so intense that we could not control the outcomes completely, that the center became too far from the periphery. So that when 76 happened, for instance, we have created such a sense of urgency for freedom and liberation that many of our young people thought the best way to attain this is to go into exile and seek to arm themselves to come and overthrow the regime. So we had a huge exodus of people, and this huge exodus of people who went out did not necessarily have the leadership skills, the infrastructure, and anything to create an external organization. And they found themselves recruited into the older organizations which had their own programs, their own world outlook, their own historical baggage, which differed very, very, very dramatically from the ethos and the centrality of the Black consciousness movement. And you'll find this when you look at the history, subsequent history of the Black consciousness of the exile organizations, that though they recruited all of these youngsters into their ranks, there was great incongruity within their ranks between what our young people had been taught in Black consciousness and what these older organizations sought to recruit them into. And I know now, operating amongst our young people, ex-veterans and so on, that still exists. You find a lot of young people who went into the ANC, for instance, who went into the PAC, for instance, and other organizations, who still at heart are Black consciousness. They feel that they are Black consciousness, but we did not have the tools to supply them in order for them to further the revolution, besides the fact that our leadership had been removed. Those are some of the factors which I think led to the weaknesses of the Black consciousness movement. But let's turn to the question that you now talk about, that is the question of 1994 in the elections. My view is that it was the most correct decision for us to take. And I think if we seek the evidence for that, the evidence is to be found in the current period, where we all know, all of us know, including those that participated in that settlement, that was a sham settlement, including the very people who participated in it. Everybody knows it was a sham settlement, and in fact, it is the direct cause of the state of dysfunctionality of our country today. So if anybody asks us, why did you not participate? We point him to the current period. This is what would have happened with or without our participation, because the results were predetermined. 1994 was there to endorse decisions that had been decided long ago by the imperialist world and what they considered to be the preferable leaders of the new South Africa. But the results are here for all of us to see. The bigger question now should be, now that we all know, or most of us know, that the system is not functioning, now that we know that the system is dysfunctional, in fact, it's collapsing, now that we know that, how do we respond? How do we respond? It is true that we are not as good as we are supposed to be or should be, but I think that this is a moment where our people need us. And they need us, and we should know what to do, because we've done it before in more difficult circumstances than now. I think we've done it before, we can do it. You must remember that when SASO was formed in 1968, the environment was terrible. It was hostile. There was an informer in every corner. There was an informer in your own house. You couldn't say what you want. Our children, our dads, our mothers were all afraid. And the sentences and the response of the regime was vicious. We now have a slightly, thanks to this bourgeois freedom under which we are, we have a slightly more friendly situation, environment in which to operate. But we've done it before. And luckily, some of us are still alive. and I'm one of those who hasn't yet put down his arms. I have not yet. I still have my boots on. We can do it. And I'm elated when in fact, I'm tossed between two emotions. Sometimes when I see young people and I see how wasted they are and how idle they are and how they turn into criminality, I get very, very pessimistic. But then on the other hand, when I see what the young students are doing, roads must fall, when I see fees must fall, when I look at all of these young people who are trying different kinds of things, groping. I know they are groping. They're not too sure where they're going. When I hear them calling for Biko, I know that Black consciousness was right. And I know they need us. And I think we should be there marching step by step with it. And we can do it. I don't think this is not the time for regret. This is the time for us to wake up and do it. Thank you.
And Tate Mosala, I just want to say, you're going to go in, but there are questions. You will respond to them, Tate Mosala, but there are questions that we must go to before we come towards the end of the conversation. And Tate Mosala, as you go to make that response you wanted to make earlier, your life a little bit further, and argue that if this tactical move, and I'm not talking about negotiations, I'm talking about the first elections. I'm arguing tactically it was a wrong move. And it's borne out by this fact that we boycott 1994. We actually go in 1999. Now, what had
We've lost you. Andile, we've lost you. Andile? I don't know. I have lost you.
No, he's lost, yes.
Lost, yeah.
No, I'm sure he'll come back.
Well, since he's recording, just in case we run out of time.
Yeah, okay.
I was going to take him back to earlier tactical settlements. You see, this was not the first. 1994 accommodation of the imperialist and local oppressors was not the first. They tried it many times. You know, we come from urban councillors, several other things, settlements, and people were raising the tactical issue on those things, including or culminating in the Homeland Agreement. You know,
actually, we come from Ibunga Labantu in the Transkei. We come from the Native Representative Council of 1936.
Yeah.
Which some people went into. People went. In fact, it was one of the ruptures in the liberation movement in 1936 when some people decided to go and collaborate with that structure, and some people boycotted it.
Yeah.
So too,
and it didn't kill the revolution. People still came back. It may have taken different times, but people were able to come back and say, this is not it. And our view is that what we bought is not the final thing we can get. The revolution must continue. This was
and
one of the ultimate sellout settlement, maybe the last of them, but the revolution cannot accommodate to it.
Absolutely.
And we are not, that's where we are. We talk about, he raises an important point about the second elections.
Yes.
And now that is the reason why the Black consciousness movement then demarcated. Because it reflected the uneven development within the movement that we talked about earlier. The revolutionary part of the Black consciousness movement still believes that there is no adequate tactical accommodation to get into.
You're so right, Mosala, because we were asked in the 70s why we opposed the Bantustans. And we opposed the Bantustans vehemently, but the Bantustans were a form of settlement. Maybe I should enlighten the listeners here that when we got onto Robben Island one of the issues over which we disagreed with Mandela was Mandela could not understand why we opposed, for instance, the IFP and Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi. But we said, no, the IFP is part and part of the regime and we are not accepting that settlement at all. But Mandela saw that as some form of forward movement, some form of strategy, but we disagreed vehemently with him over the whole question. And you know that parts of the ANC were part of the Bantustan arrangement. When you, Mosala, and I went to Bishop's Court to meet Mandela and Tutu in 1993,
I've just
you
picked
remember
up a photograph of ourselves from there. That's okay.
You remember that at that meeting with Mr. Mandela, there were us, Azapo, there were the PAC, and there were all the Bantustan leaders there at that meeting. I'm sure you remember.
Yes, sir.
And we made it very clear that we cannot discuss the future of our country in the presence of the Bantustan leaders, that the Bantustan leaders belonged in the same camp with de Klerk. We were prepared to talk with Mandela, the ANC, and the PAC, and to form a patriotic front with the liberation movement on one side, and on the other side, de Klerk and the Bantustan leaders and all of the Bantustans. In other words, a two-sided table. But Mr. Mandela disagreed with us and said, no, the Bantustans are part of us and we should be with them. And we decided that, no, we are walking out, you remember.
Yes.
But to his credit, and I remember this very clearly, Holomisa stood up in that meeting and said, yes, these Azapo chaps are right, because we are sellouts. Holomisa in his own words. He said, yes, these Azapo chaps are right, we are sellouts.
Yeah.
You remember that, Mosala?
I remember that he was supported by Enos Mabuza.
Yes, he was supported by Mabuza. And that is a historical fact. So these kind of disagreements. Now, our background throughout part and parcel of Black consciousness, besides the other elements that Mosala talked about, which was identity, which is fearlessness, militancy, agency, but part and parcel, integral part of Black consciousness was non-collaboration. And we were very strong on non-collaboration. And if you check out our history, you remember we expelled Themba Sono, who was the president of SASO in 1972, for daring to speak to the Americans on what they termed detente. In other words, de-escalation of conflict. Our approach was we wanted to escalate conflict. We wanted the contradictions to rise to the top and to meet at the top. That has been our approach throughout. We also expelled Mr. Nkondo from Azapo earlier on. I'm sure you remember that.
Yes.
Also, again, for dealing with Helen Suzman and the other liberals. So that was our approach.
I must, yes. Yes.
Yes.
You can conclude that thought in that Mokoape, and then we'll have to go, please, to questions. People are impatient to hear what you're going to say about their questions.
Let them question.
Okay. The first question is going to do with the church in Tate Mosala, and it says that in terms of the church, I mean, how do we engage? The question is, what was their relationship with Black theologians of the time?
Well, Black theology was not born in the church. Black theology was born in the Black consciousness movement outside the church. We brought Black consciousness into the church through Black theology, because the church was one of the one of the component parts of colonialism that needed to be liberated. So the relationship between Black consciousness and Black theology and the church is one where first we had a commitment to the freedom of our people, the repossession of our land. That was principle number one. And from there, we can talk about church, we can talk about theology, we can talk about God. And that's why we didn't struggle to find a good God in the Bible. You know, we found that there was a multiplicity of gods there, some of them extremely bad, some of them very, very oppressive, some of them were patriarchs, some of them were militarists. If you read the Bible, only Black consciousness can help you find the real word of God in the Bible. There's a lot of stuff there that's extremely noisy. Those of us who work in data science can tell you that data tends to be extremely noisy, and therefore you need to clean it. Now, Black theology starts by cleaning up the Bible, because the Bible is an unliberated document. It cannot liberate you unless you first liberate it.
Okay, Ntate Mokoape, and also Ntate Mosala, you can also judge. And the second question says, is there any reason why BLF, AZAPO, SOPA, BCP, PAC, and the BCM United can't unite towards contesting the next election? If there is no reason, can we get a commitment of unity from the panel?
Yeah, okay.
Well, I think there's a great desire I detect amongst our people, all of our people, who have discovered the uselessness of this dispensation that we have. There's a great desire among our people for an alternative. And our people have identified those organizations that you have mentioned as being the fulcrum of what should constitute an alternative to this current regime. And I personally, if you ask me personally, after being a deputy president of AZAPO, and when the schisms came in AZAPO, I spent all of my time trying to unify the Black Consciousness Movement. Right up to now, in the Black Consciousness Movement United, that is an effort to attempt to unify the movement. And I'm very eager and enthusiastic on that project of reunification. And I think it can be done by drawing maybe a minimum program of action so that we don't get into too much polemics. Some people may disagree with me, but that is my own approach to the matter. I actually do think the time has come for a united front. Maybe just to wind back. I've just been telling you now that when we met the ANC and the PAC at the Bishop's Court in Cape Town, our attempt was to build a united front at that time. You also might know, some of you, that Steve died whilst he was attempting to form a united front of black organizations. I am confident of the strength of Black consciousness, that in a united front, we will not be swamped. I know some organizations fear that when they get into unity with others, their outlook, their ideology will be swamped. I'm confident enough of the strength of Black consciousness that in whatever combination it comes with anybody, it will not be swamped. So I'm definitely of the opinion that the united front should be formed.
Just a quick point. I think the difficulty I have with the question is the end part of it, where it's the reason. I think that's what's problematic. Of course, the elections might be a bus stop that we encounter on our way together, but but our goal has to be the total liberation of our people and the repossession of our land. We can't unite for the elections. We have to unite for the liberation of our people. Elections might be one mechanism we agree on as we move on. And the parliament is certainly a very, very bad place to be in. But we might actually decide for tactical reasons and all kinds of reasons against. You missed our discussion on tactical matters.
Yes, yes.
But I suspect our enemies are the ones that deliberately took you offline. But that point of elections, please, let's take it out of our heads. We're not just trying to win the elections. These elections that have happened have done nothing for our people. It has to be because we place our people at the central point of our struggle.
Ntate Mokoape, that intervention by Professor Mosala sounds to me like an intervention that Lenin will struggle a lot with, that the front of bourgeois elections at a given time is not one you abandon to the bourgeoisie. You have to go in there and use that space precisely because that's where our people are. I mean, I'm not sure I agree with an articulation that says bourgeois elections are not an important front in this struggle. I think precisely because we somehow think that the revolutionary process is outside of that contestation, we find ourselves where we are today. So I want to emphasize that it is a tactical mistake, but there is this call.
I'm not saying no elections.
Yeah.
But if and that's why I talked about the bus stop, that there'll be many stops and stations and places where we will find ourselves. But
okay.
They don't exhaust our destination. Elections, but if they are completely bourgeois, if there's nothing else about them except bourgeois, then we don't belong there. So we can.
That is why the minimum program that
only about bourgeois things.
Yeah.
And that I accept.
No, absolutely. I mean, and I want when Tate Mokoape reflects, the movement I'm part of, Black First, Land First, has taken very controversial positions that a lot of Black consciousness organizations are not comfortable with. For instance, we have associated ourselves with what we believe is a possible minimum program, what is called the radical economic transformation of the ANC, of mostly the Zuma faction, if you like. And we see other components of the liberation move frowning upon this. An argument is that it does present a framework that can be populated with the possibility to unite and to assault white capital. And again, it's a question of what do we understand to be the primary contradiction. And without resolving that, we end up fighting amongst ourselves, including fighting with homeland leaders, which, in my view, again, I think it's not the central battle. But I think, in principle, the call for a minimum program, which must provide sufficient possibilities to be antagonistic to white capital, is something that we, in principle, should be able to work on, and then go on practice to see whether we can take the settlers on.
Well, that is precisely what I'm saying. That obviously we cannot unite to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. When we unite, we must unite on a definite revolutionary program, which contains certain minimum non-negotiable points. For instance, the question of land is non-negotiable. It cannot be that after 300, 400 years of relentless and bloody struggle of our people, in which so many of our people died and suffered, and in 2, 3, 4 years, we wipe out all that history, and we actually abandon the Costa's belly. What was this fight about? This fight was all about the land. and we substitute it with insubstantial things, such as a cross on a piece of paper. Yes, much as that might be important or tactically, but that certainly was not our struggle. It was not the struggle of our fathers. It was not the struggle of our forefathers. It was not the struggle of our great-grandfathers. And we can't postpone it to our great-grandchildren, because that struggle still has to be fought. It will be fought. In fact, if we don't want to fight it, then of course we are cowards. Then we are postponing our struggle to our great-grandchildren, because it is a struggle that has to be fought. And so
that brings us to our concluding remarks. I have, for on my part, I really had a good time listening to these important insights, and I hope that this is not the last time that we are having these conversations. We need to sit down, articulate a minimum program, invite other revolutionary forces, and see whether we can push this agenda of the Black consciousness movement to liberate our people. And so for me, I want to just thank you. I mean, I have no words to thank you. As I said, you're my leaders, my teachers. I draw a lot of inspiration from you. And I hope that we can make one more push against the enemy of our people. Ntate Mosala, your concluding remarks.
My concluding remarks is that, well, let me put it this way. They're biblical. My remarks are biblical. The field is full of harvest, and there are no people to go and do the harvest. Also, the sheep is willing, in spite of 1994, to be led, and there are no shepherds. Our people now have become as brave as we were, but their program is called Service Delivery Protests. Now, that's not even their own term. It's the system's term, Service Delivery Protests. What they ought to be engaged in is political resistance against all the things. Political resistance, not service delivery protests. And so I am saddened that we've gotten out. I did tell Mandela, though, I did tell him that if we are not careful, we will depoliticize our people. And every time we talk about service delivery protests, I feel that that's what's happened. We have depoliticized our people. Instead of saying we want our land, we want our institutions, we want our churches, we want all of the things that have been alienated from us or are alienating us, instead of taking them over, we're doing service delivery protests. And that for me is not the reason why I joined the struggle.
Thank you. Ntate Mokoape?
Well, on the contrary, with my comrade Mosala, I see the service delivery protests as a sign of hope for the revolution. And I think this is what happens in all struggles when people are still groping. Actually, service delivery protests, that term, was coined by the media and the liberals. What these protests actually indicate is that our people feel that their cause has been betrayed. What our people are saying is that we don't find ourselves in this new system that you guys have created. Those protests, and there's almost a protest per day in this country. I think we're one of the highest, we have one of the highest concentrations of protests in the world. But they are a statement by the system, by our people, that they don't accept the legitimacy of this regime any longer. And you can see how the regime responds, because the regime understands that these are not only service delivery protests, that they are actually a sign of rebellion, The regime responds with what? With violence. The state unleashes violence on our people every day. The violence of the killing of George Floyd is nothing compared to the violence that is meted out to our people every day in the streets of this country. I'm not talking of the violence of hunger and the violence of poverty and the violence of malnutrition. Those are other forms of violence. I'm talking about direct violence on our people. When our people protest for water, they protest for electricity, they protest for houses, etc. Every day they are chased. In fact, if you did not know that this was 2020, if you took a picture of 2020, put it side by side with the picture of 1993, you think it's happening at the same time. You would not believe that the 2020 picture happens in a so-called democratic free country. It's exactly the same.
But that's why you are right. They are rebellious acts. They are not revolution.
They are acts of rebellion.
They are not revolution. They are
No. They will be turned into revolution by us. Of course, the ground is fertile for revolution, but it is the revolutionary leadership that needs to come to the fore. Actually, we are walking way behind where our people are, and we shouldn't be walking so way behind them. At the very least, we should be walking side by side with them, if not ahead of them.
Thank you, and Dr. Mokoape. Thank you again, Professor Mosala. You know, this forum is actually part of a booklet, Blacks Can Be Racist, which people also can get as a hard copy on this very platform, or you can get an e-book version by simply sending a message, inboxing on this very page, and you'll be able to get your copy as soon as possible. It's part of the ideological contestation of what is racism and how do we fight it. And again, we must remember, this is June 16. We remember the over 600 children who, as we have heard today, actually were revolutionary subjects who said enough is enough, and we have to continue that journey towards total liberation of our country, to build a socialist Azania. Diabulela kakhulu again, Prof and Dr. Amandla.
Diabulela. We should do this again.
We should. Thanks. It was
absolutely
really great.